So as you guys know, we've been in the retrofitting industry since 2005. That's over almost 13 years this summer. And, you know, for as long as we've been around, you know, to install a lot of the products that we sell, you've got to open up your headlights first. And when we got into it, almost all headlights were sealed with, you know, simple butyl glue, which is very soft, becomes very pliable when heated, so you can open up the headlight quite easily. But these days, times have changed, and a lot of headlights, especially from a lot of domestic vehicles, a lot of European vehicles, thankfully not so much still in the Japanese makes and models, but it's getting there, are using what's known as Permaseal glue, which tends to be a little bit more of a pain in the ass. So I got my dude Val from Overlit Customs, what's up, here with me today, and he is going to give us a little bit of kind of information and best practices when it comes to opening Permaseal, clearing out the channels, and then eventually resealing the headlights so that you can complete your project, whatever it may be, successfully and moisture free, because there's nothing worse than a headlight full of moisture, right, man? So right now we got this Camaro headlight in our hand. We've got the oven warming up, and we'll get to it and talk about it along the way. All right, so we're standing here in front of the oven. Step one, it's usually a good practice to have an oven because you're gonna need one of those. So Val, talk about the Permaseal on this light and kind of how you're gonna attack this. I mean, is this something that's just good for, you know, GM headlights? Is what you're gonna do kind of good across the board? Are there different kinds of Permaseal, or kind of what's the deal on that?
So I mean, there's a few different kinds of Permaseals. Usually domestics and Europeans vary. I mean, the process is still about the same. I usually do about 215 to 220 for 15 to 20 minutes.
That's Fahrenheit.
That's Fahrenheit, yes. Not Celsius.
Let's be clear there.
Preheated. So preheated, stick the headlight in for 10-15 minutes. Sometimes you have to go further than that to 20 minutes. I mean, like I said, obviously depending on the Permaseal. Usually the domestics do take longer, so 15 to 20 minutes for sure. And then once that comes out, we'll start prying.
Okay. Now, what about like the outside channel of the headlight? I mean, I think that can also vary too. So maybe we should talk about different things that you might encounter along the outside perimeter of the housings, like clips, screws. You know.
I mean, basically, before you stick it in the oven, you definitely want to make sure you take out all of the screws that hold the lens in. This one doesn't have any, but there are sometimes screws that are like holding the lens down to the channel. So you want to do that
before you put the headlight in the oven.
Before you put it in the oven.
Right, because if you're messing with that stuff when the headlight comes out of the oven, the headlight's only going to cool off, and you're going to have to reheat it again before you start prying.
Plus the screws are hot.
Right. So any screws you want to do before. Clips, usually I do them kind of after it's already hot, because they become a little bit more pliable, and you can kind of just bend them out of the way and then bend them back.
Yeah, because if you try to do them before, they usually break.
Right.
So.
And then I think that, you know, last but not least, in terms of, you know, kind of other materials and, you know, work surface, you know, what do you usually work on top of, like a cardboard box or a soft cloth? You know, because when you're working on it, I mean, the headlight's going to get kind of molested, and you don't want to scratch the lens because, well, it's your headlight lens. You don't want to fuck that up. So what's your go-to as far as that goes?
I mean, usually when I take it out of the oven, I usually just work on top of the oven.
On top of the oven, okay.
Make sure that's clean.
So you like to live on the edge a little bit.
I guess. I usually, if the lens is closer, basically if you put it like this and I'm prying it, and the lens is like really close to the oven, then I do like bubble wrap or cardboard.
Right.
But I mean, usually you have a good space, so
right.
I usually don't.
In general, though, I think that, you know, when we're talking to our customers, we recommend that you work on some sort of soft and clean surface, so that if you do put the lens face down, you don't scratch it up. That's good practice. Exactly. You know, and usually I know when I'm working with a hot headlight, you know, you have to have some kind of dexterity too, and I like to wear mechanics gloves. They're fairly inexpensive, you know, but they're thick enough, and they're kind of made of like a nice material that it blocks the heat and still allows you to get a good grip on the headlight. Is that what you use, mechanics gloves?
Which I actually don't use. I used to use them, but then I don't know. They're sometimes get annoying. You can get from I get them from Home Depot. They're like these. So they're basically cloth gloves with like a silicone palm.
Okay.
So they're a lot more flexible, and you just have more grip.
Right. So some kind of work gloves, oven mitts. You know, I mean, obviously they're good so that you don't melt your hands.
Yeah.
But you have to have something that you can actually work with.
Yeah.
And then last but not least, I mean, screwdrivers. What do you go to? What's your go-to as far as that's concerned?
Yeah, typically screwdrivers. Sometimes I use these, the Permaseal opening tools.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they're handy, sometimes they're not.
Right. It just really depends. Yeah, but I mean, for all intents and purposes,
for the most part,
yeah, a flat blade screwdriver will do the trick. So, you know, be prepared to ruin the screwdriver, because typically speaking, you're going to get a bunch of glue and stuff all over it. But, you know, no big deal. $1 screwdriver is cheap. So, all right, man. Well, I think this headlight's warm. I'm sorry, the oven is warmed up. So let's go ahead and we'll put that thing in there. We'll set our timer and we'll make it happen. All right, timer's up. Time to take the Camaro light out of the oven and start working on this Permaseal. So Val's gonna go ahead and grab it. We've got our surface set up here over on the workbench. Just simply a plain sheet of clean cardboard. Typically speaking, it's best to kind of start on a corner. I'm not sure if that's how Val's gonna approach this light, but
I usually start on this.
That's best practice right there. So we'll go ahead and watch him work his magic and see how long it takes to get this Permaseal apart. All right, so once you've got the lens removed from the headlight housing, it's always good practice to remove the remaining Permaseal glue from the channel. And that way, when you put it back together, you're gonna start with a clean slate. You can replace that glue with something more traditional, such as the Morimoto Retro Rubber, which is just beautiful. But it is good to make sure that that channel is fully cleaned out, and that's gonna help to ensure that when you put it back together, you're gonna get nice, clean, OEM-like seal with no moisture in the headlight. All right, so once you've got all your modifications complete, no matter what it is you're doing, a projector retrofit, installing halos, a clear lens swap, you name it, obviously you're gonna have to reseal the headlight to complete your project. We're gonna be using the retro rubber glue from Morimoto. We sell this stuff probably 100 rolls a day. It is that popular and it works super well. It's available in black and gray. Today we're just gonna be using black because that's what the headlight was sealed with to begin with. And Val will give you a little bit of an overview on, again, best practice when it comes to resealing the headlight so you can put it back together and back on your car. So let's talk about this a little bit, Val. You know, the retro rubber, obviously, when it comes out of the box, it's in a predetermined width or thickness of the strand. But that doesn't mean that that's necessarily what you have to use when you're putting it back into the channel. Yes or no?
Correct. But, I mean, if you're working on a project like this where you took out all of the previous sealant, then I mean you generally want to use it at this thickness
as is. Okay.
Because I mean you have a big channel to fill.
Right.
If you're working on a butyl headlight, obviously you want to make it a lot thinner.
Just to kind of fill in the gap in some of the stuff that peeled off on the lens side. Exactly. And usually the best way to do that, you know, if you need to adjust the thickness depending on the headlight you're working on, you know, or what the situation is, you can really just stretch it out a little bit to, you know, make that, thinner as needed. So you just pick any location to kind of start, or what's your go-to there?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Doesn't really matter.
Doesn't really matter. So you just pick any location in that channel and just start layering in the butyl.
Yeah. Make sure you press it in there pretty well, so it goes down as far as the front can go.
Okay, so now that the butyl is completely filling that channel back up, the next most logical step is to rough fit the front lens back onto the housing. So you can just simply place that back onto the housing, you know, aligning all of the clips at the best that you can. And then in reverse, you're going to put the headlight completed back into the oven, reheat the entire housing, including the glue and the front lens, so that all that softens up. You can clamp the two halves together, reset the clips, and boom, you're good to go. All right, so Project Camaro Permaseal is complete. We now have this headlight completely resealed. We just opened it up, and hopefully you guys found some of that footage helpful. I think that it's important to note that, what you saw here was about as easy as it gets on the Permaseal side. And honestly speaking, we didn't really have any intentions on that. Permaseal can vary depending on if you're working on something from Ford, GM, Chrysler, or Mercedes. So, just bear in mind that you may have to put the headlight in and warm it up on a couple cycles. Typically speaking, 220 degrees Fahrenheit is our go-to temp, no matter whether you're working on Permaseal or a butyl rubber headlight. But, the rule of thumb is that with Permaseal, generally it's just about more time. This headlight, for example, was in the oven for a full 18 minutes before we were able to pry it apart pretty easily. So, with a little bit of temp, a little bit more time, and certainly a little bit more patience and muscle, you should be able to get apart and reseal any headlight quite effectively at home. If you're unsure on how to do that, if you're having any problems, definitely feel free to hit us up. We have seen and worked with almost every application under the sun, so our guys here at TRS are certainly familiar with all those different applications out there and may be able to guide you a little bit more specifically. And if you want to say fuck all that and not even have to worry about it, then you probably should just call Val from Overlit Customs and send him your headlights and let the man go to town. But anyways, hopefully that was some helpful information for you guys, and we enjoy making this little video for you. So catch you later.